The primary reason we lift weights is to gain muscle mass. And this is something that people lose sight of when we have these conversations, because they forget that all the health benefits, all the physique benefits, all the metabolic benefits, all the performance benefits for sports comes from the muscle mass that we gain. And even when it comes to the joint specific things, that people want to do, they're like, well, I'm training to replicate this motion or this specific range of the motion of the joint for my sport. Well, why? Because you are hypertrophying muscle fibers related to those joint angles. And therefore, that is what gives you extra performance and the ability to produce more force. But again, people have to remember this. When you understand this basic concept, it lets you know that really what we are trying to do is gain muscle. Okay, and even when it comes to maximum strength, the data shows that once we account for a person's genetics, their leverages, right, their insertion points, 90% of the strength that we can produce comes from our muscle mass. In other words, things like the movement patterns, the neural drive, all this stuff, the reason we hit big, heavy maxes and things like that, to train those things, they really only account for about 10% of our strength. They only account for about 10% of it. The muscle that we gain accounts for the other 90%. All right, the same thing when people are like, well, I'm lifting weights to help me tone up. I'm lifting weights to help me lose body fat. Okay? And this is a tough one for, oftentimes a lot of women struggle with this. They're not understanding that the things they want are to gain muscle. I'm like, you are trying to gain muscle. When you see those bikini girls, right, they have a lot of muscle. They have gained a lot of muscle, because if you just lost weight and you didn't gain muscle over a person who'd never worked out, you gained no muscle mass, like actual pounds or kilograms of muscle, you would look emaciated, okay? You would just look emaciated, like someone who has a muscle wasting condition or someone with a major eating disorder. For people, whether it's men or women, to look fit and toned and athletic, you're going to have to gain significant amounts of actual muscle tissue. You're going to have to. Okay, and what that might mean is that for someone who's lost a significant amount of body fat, they may be smaller in terms of their dimensions, like their actual measurements of their arms, their legs, everything may actually go down as a result of that. So you're not getting bigger, but you are definitely getting denser. So when people even talk about being toned, what that actually means is usually gaining muscle mass and losing fat mass. That is what it actually means. So when they say, I just want to tone up, well, you're still doing the same thing a bodybuilder does. You are doing the same thing a bodybuilder does, you're just not doing as much of it, right? You're just not doing as much of it. You're not trying to gain as much muscle, but you are trying to gain muscle. And we need to be clear, for most people's goals, most people are not going to get too big. If you were to spend, coming from an untrained state, you were to spend 1 to 2 years gaining as much muscle mass as humanly possible through diet and through lifting weights, you are probably not going to be big. All right? You're not going to be the big that people think of. They forget that because they're not understanding that the people who they're seeing who are really big, they might have a decade or more. And they're probably chemically enhanced on top of it. Okay, they didn't get that big just from lifting weights always. All right, there's other stuff involved. So for most people, you're not going to get that big. The same thing for people in sports. Well, I don't want to get slower. You don't get slower by gaining muscle from lifting weights. Unless you are getting chemically enhanced levels of big, you're not going to get slower. And by that same token, look at some of the athletes who have been caught in those heavier weight classes in fighting sports, who got unlucky and got caught, because I'm not saying most of them aren't doing something. Were they slow? Right? Look at some of those people. They weren't slow. They were powerhouses. I mean, that goes all the way back to baseball. So just pointing that out. You have to really gain ridiculous amounts of muscle for it to slow you down. So if someone's in a weight class, you're probably not going to gain enough muscle from lifting weights to go out of your class. You could just get leaner to compensate. And if you do, then you probably are not in the right weight class for your frame to be optimal anyways. So back over to the point, everything that we are doing is from gaining muscle. So the metabolic increases. Someone says, well, I just like the fact that I can eat another 1,000 calories a day, without gaining any body fat. Well, that's because you gained a bunch of muscle. That muscle mass increases your metabolism. It increases your things like your NEAT, right? Your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. All these things go up considerably when you gain muscle. The health benefits, the resistance to cancer, because we know the studies show that strength training reduces the risk of cancer considerably. It's a very statistically significant amount. Also increases the probability of surviving cancer treatment. It doubles your survival rates, by the way, like when you have to go through chemo or whatever. Why? Because of the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue itself offers a degree of protection against cancer. Doesn't mean it makes it impossible, but it does give a measurable degree of protection. And scientists know the pathway by which it does it. It isn't just, hey, we noticed that it does it. No, they've measured that it does it, but they also know why it does it. It's actually understood. It also, the same thing, gaining muscle improves cardiovascular health, as long as you are not excessively big from using stuff, okay? You're not going to get so big from weightlifting that it harms your health. It is always a net positive in terms of cardiovascular health risks, diabetes, cancer, all of these things. So again, we need to be clear why we are in the gym lifting. We're in the gym lifting to gain muscle. We're not lifting weights trying to burn extra calories during the lifting, right? We're not trying to always gain all these sport-specific skills. You might have joint angle specificity that's going to carry over to your sport, but that's because you're gaining the muscle that works those joint angles, right? You're gaining muscle fibers and making the ones thicker that happen to perform that function, which is obviously going to help you produce more force, okay? Everything that we are doing, it is about gaining muscle tissue. And when you understand that, it lets you step back and say, well, what am I doing with my lifting? What am I doing with my training? And when you understand that, it makes sense that most of your training, barring a few sport-specific things that you might need, you really should be thinking somewhat like a bodybuilder in your approach to lifting. Maybe you don't have to worry about symmetry and balance and proportion as much as them. But the ideas itself, yeah, you should be training to gain muscle. That's where you get all these health and aesthetic benefits from. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.